Hello, mortals! I am the BookTube Goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. David Eddings was a monster. Yes, the prolific and acclaimed author of dozens of epic fantasies, from the Belgariad to the Belmorian to the Lenium, was a convicted felon who abused children. Oh, and so too did his wife and co-author Leigh Eddings. Now, I've mentioned this incident before on my live stream and a few other videos when discussing separating the art from the artist. I don't see many people talking about David and Leigh Eddings, at least not their personal life, especially since David passed away in 2009 and his wife Leigh passed away in 2007. It wasn't until after their death that these facts came to light. And I should warn you, I'm going to discuss some very disturbing events involving a child, so take this as a trigger warning and just click off this video if these types of discussions disturb you. First of all, who are David and Leigh Eddings? You probably recognize the names if you are into epic fantasy. Their books have sold over 18 million copies. 18 million. Yeah. If you didn't know before, Eddings is a huge name in the fantasy genre. And the books were pretty good. I enjoyed both the Belgariad and Melorian. No, they weren't the best fantasy I've ever read, but they were the only epic fantasies being published at the time, and they were all right. Now, personally, I stopped reading Eddings because I didn't like the depiction of a gay man who was a villain and a pedophile in one of his books, and so I stopped reading him, but he went off my radar until I stumbled across an article that revealed that David Eddings and his wife Leigh had spent a year in jail. So what happened? We have to travel back to 1970. David Eddings and his wife Judith, who would later change her name to Leigh, had two adopted children, a boy and a girl named Scott and Kathy. At the time, David Eddings was an assistant professor at the Black Hill State College in South Dakota. By the way, this was 1970, so the term spare the rod, spoil the child was a common sentiment. So to get convicted of child abuse to the point where you get jail time must have meant that it was pretty bad. And it was. By the way, I should point out that all of this was non-sexual. Not that it makes it any less terrible, but I don't want your mind to go in that direction. Also, keep in mind that these are not allegations. They are facts. Since the couple pled guilty and they were convicted and they spent time in jail. So it's facts, not allegations. Let me just read some excerpts from an article so you can get an idea of what happened. This is the Black Hills Weekly, Wednesday, February 11th, 1970 edition. The article is entitled Spearfish Couple to Face Jury for Child Abuse. A Spearfish college instructor and his wife have been bound over to the March term of the circuit court on 11 counts of child abuse and intent to do great bodily harm against their 4-year-old adopted son. A utility company employee took the stand and testified of a visit to the Eddings house on December 16 at 11 a.m. to read the meter. He said that Mrs. Eddings turned on the light and took him down into the basement where he noticed the child in a cage, and that Mrs. Eddings told him that they had a problem with the boy not wanting to eat his food, so as punishment he was put in the basement, and that he had been down there for 2 days. So then they got a visit from the sheriff, who brought a photographer, and the article goes on to describe the photos. They depicted a restraining device hanging on the wall, a door which was laid on two packing crates with a mattress on top of it, the boy's swollen hand, the steps leading from the kitchen to the basement, showing the rear view mirror installed, which gave them a view of the boy's pen, the dining table at which the couple and their 18-month-old adopted daughter had been eating dinner, the gas meter near a washing machine, two different views of the wire enclosure, the bed and its restraining strap, the half of a large safety pin hanging on the wall, the table inside the enclosure on which was sitting a beer can, a bowl, a jar with a spoon in it, and two small boards, a toilet seat which featured restraining straps of cloth, and other photos showing some scratches on the wall and some spots. And then a physician was called who came over, and he found the child in a fenced enclosure under the basement steps, wearing only an undershirt. The child was described as bewildered, friendly, but frightened. On first examination, he noted one of his hands were swollen as if circulation had been impaired, that the child walked with a slight limp, had a small cut on his cheek, and a bruised leg. A later and more extensive examination disclosed that the child had multiple bruises on his legs, both old and fresh, and an abnormality of the scalp. The doctor went on to say that perhaps the most evident thing he noticed was the frightened and furtive glances that the child made each time someone came down the steps into the basement. The doctor's observation of the basement included a partial can of beer, an open bottle of horseradish, a saucer in the boy's cage, a small potty chair, one half of a large safety pin that hung from a small hook on the concrete block, which the child demonstrated by pointing it into a small wound on his arm, and a screen-type apparatus which the physician said was apparently used to hold him down. Both husband and wife pled guilty to one account and were sentenced to 1 year in jail. One interesting thing was that David Eddings had planned to divorce his wife after he got out of jail because, allegedly, he said in letters to his father that she had a wild temper and feared she was capable of real violence. But obviously they reconciled because they did not divorce and stayed married until the end of their lives. Phew! If you want to see more videos like this, please go ahead and give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Also, let me know in the comments what you think of this story. Now, what did David Eddings do in that year in jail? Can you guess? He wrote a novel. It was a contemporary novel that was eventually published but didn't do very well. Of course, by this time, he had lost his job at the college where he was an assistant professor. In later years, he would only say that he left his tenured faculty position because of a pay dispute. But since he lost his job during the time he went in jail, we can probably connect the dots on why he was fired. Anyway, he continued to write, but wasn't able to get published again until he picked up a copy of Lord of the Rings, which prompted him to start writing epic fantasy. And his claim to fame began in 1982 with the publication of Pawn of Prophecy, the first novel in what would become known as the Belgariad series. It was published by Lester Del Rey, and only David Eddings was credited as the author, though he later acknowledged that his wife Leigh pretty much was the co-author of all his books, and she's listed as co-author in the later novels, but apparently the publisher felt the books would sell better just under David's name, which is, yeah, a little bit sexist. By the way, Lester Del Rey was very excited about this book, because there really wasn't much epic fantasy published at the time. There was Sword of Shannara, Lord Fell's Bane, Lord of the Rings. Like I said, there just wasn't much epic fantasy being published at that time. Both David and Leigh Eddings are now deceased, so buying their books won't support them. And like I said, they're not bad books. They're decent epic fantasy. Personally, I'd find it a little hard to read their books now, knowing what I know, but everyone has their own litmus test, and that's fine. I just wanted to share with you this rather disturbing story because I still find it amazing that none of this was made public until after their deaths. Nowadays, with social media, we know when an author cuts a fart, much less does something like this. The only other newsworthy story about David Eddings was that he accidentally burned down his office because he threw a match into water that he was using to clean out a gas tank to see if it was still flammable. It turns out it was flammable. A newspaper reported when asked why he did it, he said, quote, "One word comes to mind, dumb." After David and Leigh's death, they left $10 million to the National Jewish Medical and Research Center in Denver and $18 million to Reed College for need-based scholarships for students of limited means. Of course, that doesn't erase what they did, but it goes to show that people can be complicated. Let me know in the comments what you think of David and Leigh Eddings. Do their crimes color how you view their books? They did serve time, and thankfully they didn't adopt or have any more children, and I think it's safe to assume that nothing like this happened again. Let me know in the comments what you think. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.